Good morning, everyone. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us for this morning coffee conversation that we will be having with Ambassador Andrew Young and Dr. Roberto Goizueta. I'd like to welcome you on behalf of the Emory Neurology Department Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. I know that we have recently lost two giants and two icons in the civil rights fight over the past years. And I wanted to start today off with a reading of Representative John Lewis's favorite poem, Invictus, followed by a short moment of silence. Invictus. Out of the night that covers me, black as the pit from pole to pole, I thank whatever gods may be for my unconquerable soul. In the fell clutch of circumstance, I have not winced nor cried aloud. Under the bludgeons of chance, my head is bloody but unbowed. Beyond this place of wrath and tears looms but horror of the shade, and yet the menace of the years finds and shall find me unafraid. It matters not how straight the gate, how charged with punishments the scroll. I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul. Have a moment of silence for Representative John Lewis. And now I have introduction by Dr. Levy.
Thank you, Aaron, for that. First of all, thank everybody for attending this morning, particularly our guest, Ambassador Young and Dr. Goizueta. Given our departmental missions are to provide outstanding care, research, and education, I just want to provide a little context for how this morning conversation came about. First of all, those who you don't know, both of these gentlemen have been amazing friends of our department and huge supporters of so many of our efforts. Ambassador Young has long backed our efforts to address health disparities in Alzheimer's disease in our Alzheimer's Disease Research Center. As many know, African Americans have about twice the prevalence of Alzheimer's disease compared to whites. They're diagnosed later. They often receive later diagnosis and less often treatment. And they are also hugely underrepresented in all of our research studies. And that poses growing concerns that as we make advances in diagnosis and treatment, these health disparities, the gaps are only going to widen. We all know too well that these health disparities cross all areas of neurology. Dr. Goizueta and his family have endowed our Alzheimer's Disease Research Center with their support that I can tell you goes far, far beyond the dollars that they've donated to help us realize our aspirations to find cures, including addressing health disparities. And they have really embraced everything that we're doing in our department and Brain Health Center generally, with accepting our mission and vision as their own. So we thank both these gentlemen for all they've done in the past and for joining us this morning. Second, both these gentlemen are incredible educators in their own ways, both formally and informally, and we definitely have a lot to learn from them. They both are inspirational, as you will see. We need that same humility and humanity that these gentlemen represent and embody, as we approach all of our patients who are often devastated by neurologic diseases for which we have no cure. And we definitely want to continue doing our best to impart the same humanity and humility to our teams and our trainees as we go about the privilege of caring for so many people. It's even more special in many ways to see how these two individuals with such different backgrounds have connected, as you'll hear in the lessons that we can learn from simply listening to their conversations. So the idea for this conversation this morning originally was that of Ambassador Young's, which was further developed and then supported by Dr. Goizueta. The ambassador was generously hosting our annual family affair dinner event for the Alzheimer's Disease Research Center last fall. And our dinner conversation veered to one of his passions, religion, and of course, one of ours is the brain and the links between brain health and religion, and brain religion in general. The ambassador has a memory which is better than mine, I can promise you, and he may remember the discussion better than I do. But somehow the idea of a fireside chat emerged with the original plan to discuss the links between religion and the brain. And of course, Dr. Roberto Goizueta came to mind as a gifted theologian, also a great supporter, as someone who might be a good participant in that conversation. The ambassador had actually met Dr. Goizueta when he was a child, as the ambassador was working with Roberto's father, Roberto Goizueta Sr., who was CEO of Coca-Cola at that time. Moreover, now as an adult, Dr. Goizueta has become recognized as one of the most influential Hispanic American educators, pastors, and theologians. His many contributions to academia have focused on the relationship between religious faith and social responsibility. Thus, these two people are just so well poised to help us learn. Obviously, the original plans changed quite a bit. We had anticipated having this event this past spring when Dr. Goizueta was here as a visiting professor at Emory in the School of Theology. COVID hit, social injustice has emerged importantly as an important thing that we all need to embrace. So given these subsequent events, Roberto returned to Boston, where he is joining us from his home today. And we decided that these two need to be an important opportunity for us to all learn. Certainly I struggle personally, and I think many do, in how we can best move forward. We need to have difficult conversations. And one of the best places to start is obviously to learn from leaders. And so with that, I'm gonna let Ambassador Young and Dr. Goizueta speak. But first, before doing that, I just wanna thank Dr. Aaron Anderson. Aaron, you've been great in establishing this committee for our department, and appreciate your help in facilitating this conversation. We look forward to it. I'm certainly encouraged and proud of the diversity that is increasing in our department with our faculty, staff, and trainees. We represent people coming from across the globe and people from all colors, and we have a lot more to do. I'm also pleased to introduce Dr. Monica Parker, who is going to introduce our guest. Monica has been just tireless in her efforts to help in our community outreach efforts to address health disparities for the department. So again, thank everybody for participating, and Monica, I will turn it over to you.
Monica, okay.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us on this call. My task this morning is to introduce Ambassador Young and Dr. Goizueta. Ambassador Young is a native of New Orleans, a tireless civil rights worker who has become an American politician, diplomat, as well as an activist. He began his career as a pastor and was known to be a key soldier in the civil rights struggle of the 1960s. He served the United States as congressman from Georgia, United States ambassador to the United Nations under the administration of President Jimmy Carter, and the 55th mayor of Atlanta. Since leaving office, Ambassador Young has founded and served in many organizations working on issues of public policy and political lobbying. Dr. Goizueta, native of Havana, Cuba, who migrated here at the age of 6 with his parents. He is the
Dr. Goizueta, I will continue the introduction for you. Sorry, it appears it jumped off, but so Dr. Goizueta, again, as Dr. Levy mentioned, one of the top 10 most influential Hispanic American educators and theologians by the National Catholic Reporter. And he is the 2019 to 2020 Distinguished Visiting Professor in the Alonzo L. McDonald Family Chair on the life and teachings of Jesus and their impact on culture. Was teaching a course at the Candler School of Theology here at Emory on spirituality of liberation. His time at Emory, as Dr. Levy mentioned, was cut short due to the COVID pandemic. But we'd definitely like to welcome Dr. Goizueta back on campus through this Zoom link with the aid in our discussion with the Neurology Department and the Brain Health Center. So thank you both for joining us. I would like to, again, the reason we started this event with a moment of silence was due to the recent deaths of two civil rights icons, Reverend C.T. Vivian and Representative John Lewis. Ambassador Young, I would like to personally say that we are sorry for your loss of your friends, with how much work you have worked with the both of them throughout the years. Question for both of you. Can you describe what Representative John Lewis's belief in good trouble meant to you? And we'll start with Ambassador Young.
Well, thank you very much. And good trouble was a phrase that John chose. But for me, it meant a continuous confrontation with the evils of the society. John grew up in rural Alabama, where, in truth, most young black men had no rights that white men were bound to respect. And it was almost a survival ritual for you to carry yourself in such a way that you always respected yourself, but you always extended respect to your adversaries. But you didn't treat them as adversaries. I had this different experience growing up in New Orleans, but also the same, that it was a multiracial neighborhood, but very few blacks were outnumbered, almost 10 to 1. But it was an Irish grocery store on one corner, an Italian bar on another. The Nazi party was on the third corner. And I lived right in the middle of the block. And I think from 4 years old, my parents taught me that white supremacy is a sickness. And they were my father was talking specifically about the Nazi party on the corner, where as a 4-year-old, I was walking by there and they were Heil Hitler. And he had to explain Nazism in such a way but he did it in such a way that I understood it as a sickness and not as something to fear. He also said, you don't get angry with sick people. If you can't help them and you're too young to help them, just stay out of their way. But if you are confronted, always be polite. If you know their names, address them by name, and never be afraid and never be angry. And his mantra for everything was, don't get mad, get smart. When you get angry, blood rushes from your head and your mind's not functioning well, so you're liable to do something stupid. So stay calm and think your way through. He was 5'4", and he said, you're probably not going to be any more than 5'7" or 8 at best. So you'll never be big enough to beat up everybody. So there's no need in getting angry and wanting to start fights. He said, you have to use your mind, and you have to think your way through a situation, and you have to understand the people you're dealing with. And I've always been grateful for that kind of education, because it served me all the way through life. And particularly the mantra, don't get mad, get smart. And you don't show emotion. And even if you are afraid, you don't let them know that you're afraid. It's sort of, well, it's sort of a result of, I mean, my parents, we were minorities. We were segregated against. People told their children not to play with me, but they would come around the back of the yard and play anyway, because, well, my parents were the only two people on the block that probably finished college. So we had an educational advantage. So I couldn't feel underprivileged, and I couldn't feel inferior, because I had so many blessings. It was a big family. I had like 10 or 12 aunts and uncles, everybody, and none of them had children, so they all loved me. So I was probably a rotten little brat too. And because I was surrounded by people that loved me. But even in that, New Orleans is a kind of multi-ethnic mixture. And my mother's side was Creole, and my father's side was more maybe black, former. I don't know whether my great grandfather was a slave or not. But in New Orleans, Andrew Jackson, when Napoleon was talking about attacking New Orleans, he created a militia and promised blacks free land if they fought to save New Orleans. So somehow my great-grandparents had access to land, and my parents and grandparents had educational opportunities because of church-related missions. The New England churches, the United Church of Christ, the Roman Catholic Church had Xavier University there. I think that was Jesuits. So I was surrounded by education and opportunity, though legally inferior. But the two, I mean, I could make my choice.
Yes.
I chose not to feel inferior.
Awesome. Thank you. Yes, thank you very much. Dr. Goizueta, your thoughts on Representative John Lewis's Good Trouble?
Thank you, Dr. Anderson. First of all, I'd like to join in offering my condolences to Ambassador Young on the loss of such longstanding friends and close friends. And also to thank you all for inviting me to join you in this important conversation, ongoing conversation. Dr. Levy, Dr. Anderson, it's a real honor to be here with a group of people whose work has been so inspiring to so many people, and especially in these days. So thank you. Good trouble. Something that Ambassador Young mentioned in his reflections, which is what good trouble really has meant to me, and is certainly reflected in that powerful poem Invictus, is the lack of fear, and how our freedom as individuals and as a people, is dependent upon our ability to live without fear. I think the courage that John Lewis had was rooted in that profound lack of fear that he had, which itself was rooted in his faith in God. I believe people say that the most common phrase in the Bible is "do not fear" or "be not afraid." And I really believe that fear is the root of violence. It's the root of hatred. It's the root of anger. And I don't mean just fear of others, but fear of ourselves, fear of our own reality as mortal human beings. In the 1970s, there was a social psychologist, Ernest Becker, who wrote a book called The Denial of Death, which was, he gained kind of a cult following at the time, and it's still quite influential. And he argued that it's really our own fear of our own mortality, our common mortality, that is what leads us to try to live as if we weren't going to die, or as if we're not going to share the same fate as all those other people out there who are powerless and who are vulnerable. We ourselves can somehow escape it if we only surround ourselves with enough power and privilege and wealth, etc. And so the real challenge becomes how to acknowledge our common mortality and our common vulnerability as human beings who will all eventually share the same fate. And when we're able to realize that and to acknowledge that and to appreciate that, to embrace our own fundamental contingency and vulnerability, then we are free to live our lives committed to justice, committed to community, committed to freedom, because we don't have to be afraid of others' powerlessness because we're not afraid of our own powerlessness. We realize this is what it means to be a human being. Given John Lewis's profound faith, the trust and the faith that, in fact, we don't have to be in control because someone else is, and we can trust in that someone else love and justice. So freedom, so our own freedom is not dependent on keeping other people enslaved. On the contrary, as long as somebody is enslaved, as Martin Luther King used to say, we're all enslaved. And to be free is to be able to live with an acknowledgement of our own common vulnerability as human beings. So we can just move forward and live our lives with integrity without having to be afraid of others. And I think that's, to me, that is John Lewis's very inspiring message. That is that it's a challenge to all of us to really recognize how to be free is to be free ultimately of fear of others and a fear of ourselves.
So thank you very much.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Along that line, that was another thing that I was raised with, and I think that was the way that slaves of Africa coped with slavery. That they looked forward to the life beyond, and they didn't fear it, and there was no fear of death. And all of our spirituals, swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home. I looked over Jordan, and what did I see? A band of angels coming after me. There's a whole, there literally hundreds of songs that praise death as a victory. Ralph Abernathy used to say, I don't know what the future holds, but it doesn't bother me because I know who holds the future. And it was John Lewis' faith and that overcame any fear that we might have of death.
Thank you very much.
Dr. King used to say that death is the ultimate democracy. Everybody's going to die. and you have nothing to say about how you die, where you die, or when you die, your only choice is what is it you give your life for. And as long as you're giving your life for something that you really believe in, and that if it's worth living for, it's worth dying for. And so you just hope that you have a meaningful life and death, and don't get hit by a drunk with a truck, driving a truck on the sidewalk while you're driving or something, while you're jogging, which happens.
That's true. It does, and we try to control what we can control, but absolutely live every day as much as possible without fear. In our prior conversations, Dr. Goizueta and Ambassador Young, you all mentioned kind of the early interaction that you had at the dinner table. And Dr. Goizueta, I would like to hear your initial thoughts on that interaction.
Well, that was, I'm sure Ambassador Young doesn't remember, but it was one of those kind of random experiences, that everyday experiences somebody has, that wind up, in fact, marking their lives in profound ways. And this happened over 30 years ago. I know it was, Ambassador Young and I were attending a dinner in Atlanta, and we were seated next to each other. And I don't even remember who the speaker was at the time or what the context was, beyond just this brief conversation in which, in between kind of speakers at this dinner, he looks over to me and he asked me if I thought that racial prejudice was something somebody's born with or something that they have to learn. And I, thinking of myself as an enlightened person, thought, okay, well, we're born innocent, and no, we have to be taught prejudice against others. And he looked at me and he disagreed. He said, no, I think we're born with a prejudice against people who are different from us, and we have to be educated away from that. And at the time, I don't remember whether I was in graduate school or I was a young professor, but it had this profound impact on me, and so much so that I still remember it today, and has really inspired me in my own kind of educational vocation, and really reminded me of the responsibility that I have as an educator. How am I, through my not only my teaching but my example and my witness, able to address this, these injustices and prejudices that inform us in our society, unfortunately, even today.
I remember wanting to challenge you a little bit, because I was fascinated with your father. And he was such a good businessman, and I didn't expect his son to be a Roman Catholic theologian. And the idea of original sin is what I was picking on you about, because I was struggling with that myself. And in my own family, in fact, in every Black family, you have your children are different colors. They can come up, well, you know the genetics of it, but they can reach back and get more Negroid features, or they can reach back and get more. I mean, we as a people are mixed up. We had nothing to do with the mixing. But for me, for instance, I had relatives who passed for white on my mother's side, and they would look at me and they'd say, "You're a smart boy, and you're a good-looking little boy. If you just didn't have that nappy hair." And so you get it, you get that. And then the neighbors that I played with, who were Irish and German and Polish and Italian, some of their parents would pay them not to play with me, and we knew that, and so we didn't speak in public, but they'd come around the back and get in my backyard, and we'd play together, and they'd take the money that their parents had given them and bring cookies or something. I mean, but it was both being taught to be prejudiced, but I also saw that there is some kind of need for self-affirmation in children. And this was what was one of the cases in the 1954 Supreme Court decision, where there was a test where you have children draw a tree, and they would draw a green tree, and then you'd have them draw a house, and they might paint the house some color, and then you say, "Now draw your own picture." And I remember one kid took the crayon by his fist and just scratched up the paper. And so that even at 3 and 4 years old, there's a sense of color and identity that they either are taught to accept or resent. And I was trying to figure out how to deal with that with my own children and grandchildren. And it's still a problem.
Very much so. It is a constant work that we all struggle with.
But one that us educated Black folk tend to want to deny and figure that if we can provide material security and educational security, they can deal with that on their own. But that's not the case. And well, got grandchildren and great grandchildren now, and I see it 3 generations of struggle around the identity question.
And this is Dr. Parker. One of the things that has come to play in recent politics is the colorization of political candidates. Looking at the race that's going on nationally, like in South Carolina, and here in Georgia, some of the things that have come up, racial stereotypes and physical changes, and it's a tactic that's still being used.
But in theater, in selections of professors, there is people tend to hire people they know and people like themselves, and they have to be taught that an educational experience needs diversity. I think business baseball learned it first, sports, and then business learned it, that the whole notion that the fortune is at the bottom of the pyramid, and that in order to market Well, I remember the story of Tide trying to do business in India. And they sent Tide over in the giant family size, and nobody was interested in it. When somebody told them to break it down into the 1 rupee size package, they sold all the Tide that they could get to India. And so in marketing, I think people became sensitive to the value of marketing to diversity. And I would say that that's also true of learning. That diversity enriches your thinking and makes you, it challenges you to take another look at the same perspective, at the same thing from a different perspective.
Very much so. And tying in business and the work that we all do, Dr. Goizueta, how do you feel that your father's work, not only with Coca-Cola, but also in the community with the Goizueta Foundation, kind of guided your career as a theologian?
Well, I mean, he certainly set an example for us in terms of our responsibility to the community, and an acknowledgement and a realization that the blessings and privileges that any of us have always come in the context of a community that has helped make that possible. So that I think his understanding of the importance of the community, both as a business person and as a philanthropist and as an individual, certainly set an example in all of us, and the need to promote bonds and relationships and solidarity within the community. Ambassador Young, his last comment reminded me of something that I think I grew up with, coming as an immigrant to the United States, and coming and being raised within a Cuban culture at home, and yet when I stepped outside the house, I was in Bible Belt, southern United States. I think, like a lot of immigrants, I grew up with a kind of what I would call a kind of binocular vision of reality. That is, that I grew up in between cultures, with 2 cultures and 2 languages. And I think anybody who grows up in that kind of context always realizes instinctively that there's more than one way to look at reality. That is, our languages not only reflect our reality, but they help construct it. We are born into language. And so I always knew from very early on that the way in which my English-speaking friends perceived the world and understood their reality was different from the way in which, I, as a Cuban American, had grown up, and that there were similarities, but there also were differences. So that kind of understanding, number one, always helps you to realize that what we call reality is, to a certain extent, a construction of our experience, which means that we always are able to question that reality because we have another reality that we're living with at the time. There's more than one way to look at reality. So it challenges you to ask questions like why? Why do things have to be the way they are? you can't just tell me, well, that's just the way they are, because I have another way of looking, of perceiving it. So I don't think it's coincidental that, for example, so many of our startups and our companies have been founded by and run by immigrants. I think there is something to that experience that leads to creativity, that leads to asking, why, that leads to the possibility of taking risks and doing things differently. I think that that kind of binocular vision, like I said, it provides a kind of depth perception and a three-dimensional way of looking at things, like, with my glasses, that you don't have if you close one eye and you just look at things through one eye in a monocular kind of way. And all of a sudden reality becomes two-dimensional, and you lose that sense of depth perception. And I think that's the value of, or a value of welcoming differences and different perspectives and different cultures and different languages, that it winds up ultimately enriching us, all of us. So, that's, and I think that's something that I learned from my father as well, as someone who himself was living in these two different worlds.
And I have a question to kind of ask the group. This is something that was sent to me prior to this conversation. But in working towards, and this is from a member of our faculty, in working towards a more diverse and inclusive medical academic environment, how would you suggest to keep the conversation on common interest and away from the negative competition between different people of marginalized or underrepresented groups? Thinking of disability, gender, sexual and gender minorities, race, ethnic groups, and trying to focus on, within our department, our common interest and goals moving forward in our society. Ambassador Young?
Well, what I was thinking while you were asking the question, I'm not sure I'll answer the question, but I was thinking about the concept of ethnocentricity and the fact that, well, let me pick on you, your medical profession. Mm-hmm. It bothers me that people only are looking for a vaccine as the only possible answer to this and this virus. Now, I believe in vaccines, but I also believe in nutrition, and I believe in exercise. I believe in drinking water. I believe in keeping yourself healthy. And it's almost as though the Center for Disease Control has not said anything about any of these things in dealing with this virus, and particularly in dealing with our children. Now, it may be totally, there may not be any alternatives for vaccine, but some people, well, in Germany, well, let me confess, I got fascinated with selenium as a trace mineral that a doctor was studying, a chemist was studying at University of Georgia and now at North Carolina. And there've been studies on selenium in China and in Germany, where those who had more selenium in their bloodstream had a lower death rate. When Ebola hit, they asked us, our foundation, to send them some medicine to Liberia. And we actually put 1,000 bottles of selenium that we bought from Walmart. I don't think we paid but $5,000 for 1,000 bottles of it. And we put it on a Coca-Cola plane that happened to be going to Liberia. And the people who were taking selenium in this pandemic of Ebola had a 68% survival rate. And the others who were being treated in the hospital and who got medical attention from the World Health Organization and the like had only about a 44% survival rate. Germany has done a lot with selenium. India does, Indians eat a lot of turmeric and curcumin, and that's what the curry diet is. And I heard that they have less Alzheimer's than we do because curcumin and turmeric are anti-inflammatory things that sort of keep your blood a little thinner. And I don't know about, but I'm saying that I don't like anybody, any business, any science. I think the more global and the more diverse we can get the analysis, the more likely we are to come up with more likely we are to survive. I don't say that any of these things are cure, but there's some ways that we could keep people healthy and have a lower death rate, particularly with the kids. Now we're sending them to school without a vaccine.
Yes.
But
Yes, and we always want to try to keep as diverse a group as possible in order to kind of have those different thoughts at the table. And I think moving forward with the different, whether it be vaccines or the different work in the community, not just after COVID, but also Alzheimer's, as you mentioned, and other diseases that have racial ethnic disparities, that having a diverse work environment and definitely bringing multiple people to the table helps improve those conversations as we are designing these trials and these interventions. I think we want to try to continue the conversation about how do we have that conversation about the common interest and the shared efforts within our environment of our work group, and not having different groups kind of battle each other.
It's not battle. Well, I don't know. I just think that because I don't know anything about medicine, I try to put more emphasis on diet, exercise, and water.
Yes.
And I was always arguing with my doctors. And because I went to school, I was younger than everybody else in school. And my daddy had sample vitamins. And I'd always take the sample vitamins because I wanted to get bigger. Well.
And we have a question from the chat group saying, are there proactive and deliberate ways that the institution like Emory can support the Black Lives Movement, and actions that can be taken not just for that movement, but also to try to help change the institutional racism that exists not just within our campus, but within the community at large. Dr. Goizueta?
Well, I mean, I think what we're engaged in right now is one example of the kinds of things that you can do, and also the way in which in your research and in your work you have proactively tried to be more inclusive in including different perspectives, different groups in the society. And of course, there's always the institutional challenge to be more inclusive across the board. I mean, I think Emory is in a position of with its role in the Atlanta community of being able to really draw upon its links and its networks in the community to try to be more inclusive, whether it's in the faculty, whether it's in the research that is done, the classes that are taught, and the student body itself.
And Dr. Young, this is a question from one of our residents. In speaking about changes or actions that we see that may not fit into the culture or the thoughts that Emory has put forward, how would any advice on speaking up in the environment of hierarchy from students to residents to fellows to attendings to administration, how to kind of speak up should we see something?
Well, I tell you, the one thing I insist on is that you don't speak up in anger, and you don't wait to the point of frustration to speak up. And it's always good to ask questions, and the harder the questions, even to the point where they might be embarrassing. But we don't, I mean, I was not a good student. And the reason I wasn't a good student is I didn't believe what the teachers were telling me. I remember a sociology teacher who had 2 PhDs, one from the Sorbonne and one from University of Chicago. And she was trying to tell me about juvenile delinquency, and all of her theories sounded good, and I had to learn them, but half of my class in high school went to jail. 1/4 went to the military, and 1/4 went to college. But it wasn't necessarily the smartest fourth that went to college. The smartest group was probably the ones that went to jail. I mean, and they didn't have the love and discipline that they needed to survive in this society, so they were cast aside and expelled. But they were smart, and so I don't remember whose theories it was about juvenile delinquency that she had, but I argued with her all the time, and I got a D. And it was the proudest D I ever had. See? But by the same token, Martin Luther King got a C in public speaking. I mean, in preaching at Morehouse and in seminary. See, John Portman got a low grade for designing a senior citizen high-rise that ended up being the atrium concept that changed the world of hotels. But when he first designed that, it was because the senior citizens said they didn't want to go in a building. They wanted to be able to sit on their porches and talk to their neighbors. And so it was a move of genius to put the porch inside. And they talk across an atrium. And but back when he did that, there was no central heating. And he designed it, the the airflow and all of this, but it just looked too complicated. And he didn't do well on that concept. But he stuck with it, and it helped change the world. Most of them, way back, and it always made me suspicious of this because I forget the name of the book, but it was in the bubonic plague, and it took a doctor to die to get other doctors to wash their hands. And it's almost that way now about wearing masks, that people who are in power just figure the way I want to do it is the right way. And social change is very, very complex. It's tied in with ego structures. Ego structures are tied in with traditions, and those traditions come from Europe or Latin America or Africa. I mean, when we get in this country and we start bringing them together, and I noticed at Emory there are a lot of Indians around in the medical business, and I think that's because India has always been an extremely diverse country, and it's always had to have a high level of competition and variety of thinking, and that turns out to be a good way of producing thoughtful students. The same thing with the Jewish community and oppression. The Jewish community survives oppression by doubling down, working harder, doing more, and never accepting inferiority. You know, and so it's. I think we've got to put all of these kinds of concepts into our educational platforms. And when we do that, I think we get a higher level of knowledge, a higher creativity and research. We get an expanded approach to markets. I mean, your daddy, your daddy understood that they drink more Coca-Cola in Nigeria than they do in New York. They just do. And one of the reasons why Coca-Cola has been such a progressive force in Atlanta is that when they decided in the Second World War that Coca-Cola should go everywhere the troops went, everywhere the troops are in the world, they should have a Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola became a global company before even baseball or the armed forces. And that's why they are successful. That's why they had money to pass on to
Absolutely. Dr. Goizueta?
Yeah, I just, on that point, I think, education basically teaches us to try to answer two basic questions, how and why, or it should. Too often, I think education just focuses on the question of how, how do I get ahead? How do I become a success? Without giving us the tools to ask the question, why? Why do things have to be the way they are? Why can't things be different? And I think that's back to your question about systemic racism. And again, the conversation that we're having here, to learn to ask and to dare to ask the question, why? But as Ambassador Young mentioned, too often people who ask why end up being ostracized or getting into good trouble, as John Lewis used to say. And that's something certainly that I learned from my father as well, to ask the question why. He famously said when he first became CEO of Coca-Cola that there would be no sacred cows. And he knew how to ask why do things have to be the way they are. And I think as educators, we have the responsibility to encourage students to ask the why questions and give them the tools to be able to grapple with that question themselves, and not to just take for granted that things are the way they are and that they can't be any different.
Well, I would like to thank both our panelists, Ambassador Young and Dr. Goizueta, for their time and assistance with guiding this conversation. Finish with a few thoughts that, given the current state of our world, the pandemic, protest, immigration rights, violence towards African Americans and people of color, the killings of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, Rayshard Brooks, and many others, we still need to try to keep hope for our future and working together.
Let me say that before we go,
Yes,
that
sir.
I think you ought to take I think it's too simple to say that this man automatically killed George Floyd. I wonder what was really bothering him. See, he has problems, and I don't know what the nature of his problems are. But he and George Floyd had known each other. They'd worked together for 3 years at the same place, I understand. And it's going to be interesting to me to study the defense. I hope he has good lawyers, because I would suspect, I know with the police officers that we hired when I was mayor, we understood that there were a significant number of them coming back from Vietnam. And because of their military training, we felt that they were good police officers. But we had to work with them to teach them to be sensitive to the community, because in a time of crisis, they lapsed into a military mode. And that's why we not only had Black and white police officers, but I insisted that a third of our police force be female, because women tend to be much more, they use their brains instead of their brawn. And we didn't send out patrols with just white people or just Black people. We tried to mix them up. We tried to mix them up, male and female. We had more female supervisors because they did better on tests. And so that a neurological analysis of police work, a psychiatric analysis of post-traumatic stress syndrome coming into the cities. There's a lot of work that needs to be done here. It's not as simple as Black Lives Matter. And Roberto, your father always fascinated me because he was a country music fan. And the tension between, at one level, the Black blues singers and the white country singers, like Will and Ray Charles, got along fabulously. Our mayor's father was a blues singer and rock and roll performer, and he gave Elton John his first run in England when he was doing a concert over there. So the cultural impact on this is also something that needs to be taken into consideration. And the more we can understand each other's cultures and appreciate those cultures, and that's what I was trying to do here in Atlanta. And we're doing it well, but then all of a sudden we went from 2 million to 6.5 million, and we just got overwhelmed. But I think that there's something, I've always felt that there's something special about Atlanta, that the diversity of opportunity, the diversity of experience, the number of immigrants that are coming in from all over the world, I'm almost sure you got 200 nationalities, or almost 200 nationalities in Emory somewhere. That means we are the world.
Absolutely.
And we are the children. We are the ones to make a better day, you know, so let's start living.
Absolutely.
And then the rest of that song is, there's a choice we're making. We're saving our own lives. It's true that we can make a better day, just you and me.
Awesome. And I'm not going to be able to get out of here without saying that Tommy Thomas, one of our neurointensivists, grew up in Marion, Alabama, across from the church where you were married, Congregational Church. So he definitely says hello. I wanted to kind of end our discussion, kind of describing what you were saying, kind of that hope for the future, and describe that my father's favorite poem was Desiderata by Max Ehrmann. And the last stanza reads, "With all its sham, drudgery, and broken dreams, it is still a beautiful world. Be careful, strive to be happy." And we'll end the session.
That's what
Yes.
Louis Armstrong did something like that too.
Yes. And we will end the session with Representatives John Lewis' last written words that was published in the New York Times yesterday. He finishes his opinion section with the words, "When historians pick up their pens to write the story of the 21st century, let them say that it was your generation who laid down the heavy burdens of hate at last, and that peace finally triumphed over violence, aggression, and war. So I say to you, walk with the wind, brothers and sisters, and let the spirit of peace and the power of everlasting love be your guide." The Department of Neurology and the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee likes to again thank our panelists, Ambassador Young and Dr. Goizueta, Drs. Levy and Dr. Law, for helping to schedule this, and appreciate Dr. Barker's assistance as well. Thank you, everyone, and continue to move forward. Stay safe.
Thank you.
God bless you.
Thank you.